Thank you very much. I'd like to thank WeAreDevelopers for inviting me to this conference. I speak these days almost on a weekly basis in different parts of the world, but I have to say that from my personal experience, Europe is lagging behind in AI development. So that's why being part of a conference of that size, of that magnitude, of that caliber, I think it makes me feel happy because I think it's very important that Europe will, will move forward. There's so much potential here. And I think one of the reasons is that Europe, is right now is overwhelmed with the fear about AI. So, and people talk too much about regulations and much less about innovation. And hopefully, where developers, could have a different attitude, because before you regulate, you have to build something. And I think that's an overall mood in the world, because I go around, and I could tell you that whether it's in Australia, in America, North America, or in the UK or in continental Europe, so it's this. I could feel the same sentiment, or just this very very odd mixture of curiosity, anxiety, fear, concerns. But at the end of the day, people still are arguing about AI, and it's like a buzzword. We're in the midst of the hype cycle. Everybody talks about it, but the moment you start asking top managers about implementation, it's meager. So there's a huge gap between what public thinks is happening and what is really happening. What is the real situation on the ground? I always tell people that when public thinks we are at Windows 10, in reality we're at the beginning of MS-DOS. So, and also it's important to recognize that AI is, I always say, it's not a magic wand, but it's not a Terminator. It's not a harbinger of utopia or dystopia. It's a technology. And we have to treat it as a technology. Yes, it will be destroying jobs, maybe industries, but every technology in the past, every breakthrough technology in the past did it. So we should just recognize that, even intellectual works, intellectual jobs could be quite repetitive. It could be rot. And what's happened with jobs in agriculture in the 19th century, the jobs in manufacturing in the 20th century, is going to happen with many jobs in the 21st century, which means that we just have to look forward and just start moving faster. And I always say that the problem is not that AI is developing too fast. I think it's actually too slow, because many jobs, they're already doomed, because they will be taken over since over the last few decades. It's people, many of workers, they did their job like machines. And if you have machines like jobs, they will be handled better by intelligent machines. So at the end of the day, the message is that the jobs do not disappear, they evolve. It's one of my sound bites is that everything destroys something, but nothing destroys everything. Yeah, and so we just have to recognize that we are entering sort of it's quite, it's a new territory, it's uncharted waters. But I believe that AI will not make us redundant, but will promote us, because it will help us to recognize the uniqueness of our human qualities. So we will have to move from the repetitive machine type work into something that's could be uniquely human. So I'm always arguing for human-machine collaboration, and my speech, my keynote tomorrow will be concentrated on these points to raise the optimism. I don't think this audience needs this to be optimistic, but I hope the message transcends those who be the whole, and also for them, I think it's important to recognize that we get at the stage where this philosophical recognition of what is AI and what to expect from this new technology is very important for our future success. So I'm arguing for future of human-machine collaboration, and I believe it will be a bright future. I can rely on the data that is available online, so it's the statistics about AI development. Though we all understand that the data from Chinese developers is quite opaque. We're not so sure what's really happening there. But if you follow the statistics about the research, so the United States is still way ahead. So I would say about 60% of AI research happening there. Second is Canada, which, by the way, benefited greatly from Donald Trump's policies, because a lot of developers with their green cards moved north, and the Trudeau government was smart enough to offer immediately, this was an easy, assimilation process, plus massive government support for clusters. The biggest one is in Toronto, but there's also one in Montreal and Vancouver. So the next is, again, and follow its official statistics, is UK. So frankly speaking, Europe is lagging behind. So I think Germany is the only country that does exist. It's just out of the statistical mistake. So yes, something is happening in China, but I agree partially with the quote that you just mentioned, is that yes, China's only advantage is access to data, because nobody cares about privacy in China. So, and that's the competition. It's asymmetrical competition who's facing.
Is GDPR our Chinese word?
No, of course, who cares? That's I think that one of the shortcomings for GDPR is that it imposes limitations on Western companies that must follow it, and gives unfair advantages to Russian or Chinese companies that don't give a damn about it. So we have to recognize that it's a globalized world, and unless every company must follow that, so you have a problem. So it's somehow, again, you can hardly find anything, any point where I agree with Trump administration. But what they do with Huawei, I think that's right. You have to start forcing Chinese companies to play by the rules. Otherwise, it will be, they'll be having some unfair advantages. I'm not aware about any breakthrough technology coming from China. But frankly speaking, they don't need it. It's like, if you use oil analogy, so we built Mercedes, but they have oil. So we built internal combustion engine, but they have massive data. There's also one more area where they have serious advantage, again, based on the nature of the political regime, is genomics. I'm not aware about Chinese research in genomics. Again, they don't need it. All they need is just to take the research from Europe or from America, because here, most of the research is blocked by severe restrictions on anything that involves humans. In China, who cares? So that's why this is very asymmetric world now, where the free world keeps inventing things, but also facing new limitations based by our concerns about privacy, about the well-being of individuals, and unfree world, steals or simply takes it now because it's often this open space, and uses its access to enormous amount of data and total disregard of privacy. Look, again, there's so much talent here. So, and as far as I know, from my speaking engagement, so many companies now, they're moving their research departments from Asia, even from India, some Indian companies to Eastern Europe, looking for well-trained, well-educated staff, so good work ethics. By the way, better time zones if you work from California. So Europe has its own advantages, and then one of them is again, it's great education and work ethics. So you have to enter the competition, and again, lobby as much as you can the governments to support it, because I understand enough about privacy protection. For 3 years, I'm working with Avast Software as a security ambassador, and believe me, I'm concerned about privacy. So I come from the Soviet Union, from unfree country, and I understand what it means, data collection by KGB or Stasi. But I think we're at the point where this limiting the freedom of these developers, of the companies, startup companies, is counterproductive. Again, you have to before you spend capital, you have to make capital, and I think Europe is still at early stage. That's why focusing on GDPR only, just trying to regulate things to please the public, basically puts Europe under disadvantageous position. As I said again, it's just, with China, I don't know whether China is leading the pack or not, because again, we can rely on data from US, Canada, Germany, UK. As for China, it's the data.
Yes,
Data is data, yes. So this is the statistical reports from China always question. But we understand, because this, looking at even simple at number of Chinese students who leaving America and coming back to China, you understand that something is happening there. And you just look at number of top students from computer science from leading American universities, and you find more and more Chinese names there. So yeah, they return back. Many of them return to China. Yeah, which means something is happening there. I cannot be 100% sure, how to quantify it, but something is really happening there. Now, regarding Europe, I think it's the two basic researches here. I mean, there are many things happening in Europe. So this, you have many universities that do this work, but you need two things: either strong centralized governmental programs, I don't think they're here, or the Silicon Valley spirit, which unfortunately Europe is missing. So Europe somehow is in between. So there's the government plays a role, but instead of enhancing these activities, it's trying to limit it, because again, government is made of politicians. Politicians want to win elections, and the public here is more concerned about Hollywood images of AI, not about the real development. So that's why what governments are doing is just they're scoring a few points, in the eyes of the public, but they do very little in creating conditions where the new dynamic, vibrant industry as AI could develop faster. Chess scene has evolved ages ago, probably before you were born. Yeah, it's another important element of human-machine relations, and I think that's what is greatly misunderstood by the general public, even by some specialists. Machines, every computer you look at, whether it's ranging from IBM's Watson to AlphaZero, so the DeepMind, the latest this fashion in computer science, they all are specialized. So I'm very pessimistic about AGI concept or singularity, superintelligence. I see not a shred of evidence that it's happening in the foreseeable future. So anything that we know how to do well, machines will do better. As long as we put machine on the task, whether it's chess, Go, Dota, StarCraft, Texas Hold'em poker, whatever, they will prevail. So but again, it will be specific, task that we have to assign machine to. So the game of chess has changed because everybody can now use computers for preparation. That's why the top players, they no longer have appetite for playing very sharp, aggressive lines. It's more like playing solid lines to skip the openings and to avoid potential minefields, just the big idea found by a weaker player with a very fast computer. So chess has been always affected by social and scientific changes. That's why the game has survived for 1,500 years. So that's why the chess today is different. But as you could see just following through this Magnus Carlsen, the current world champion, it still could be very attractive. I believe it's not about game being dull and less exciting. It's just about top players just not willing to take risk and not pushing hard enough. The moment you look at Magnus' game, you understand that there's still plenty to watch, because at the end of the day, it's not about humans playing computers. It doesn't make any sense. The difference between Magnus Carlsen and any chess engine like Stockfish or Commodore you can buy and download in your laptop is the same like between Usain Bolt and Ferrari. But it's still very exciting to watch people competing in track and field or in chess. And I find it still very exciting watching these games. And so I don't think that's we should worry too much about the end of chess as intellectual entertainment and exciting intellectual competition. I have to clarify my position. I do have concerns about privacy and data collection. Now, but I'm trying to be practical here. First of all, if you create data, somebody will collect the data. when people buy Alexa and then complain about their privacy, so I find some sort of the inconsistency. So people would like to have tools of convenience, like facial application, recognition, or I said Alexa, or other things that that are making our life sort of more exciting, entertaining, productive, and the data is being collected. Now, as I already said, there's a big difference between KGB data collection and Google data collection, because Google data collection normally ends up with unwanted advertising, and your data might be used for maybe political purposes. KGB data collection could end up with life and death. So that's this. So that's why I think it's very important. The two things that I always believed that are crucial. One is that companies that operate in the free world, and all of them now they are just registered in America or in Europe, so they have to be fully responsible for any breach of this confidence. I think that American legislations, they failed and they keep failing to do something with Facebook, because its business model is I call it in 2015, it's like a honeypot for Russian bear. So it was so obvious that they would use this business model just to advance their political agenda, because we saw how they've been successfully doing it in Russia for 10 years, building the troll factories and fake news industry. So, but again, something can be done there. But also important that these companies like Google, Facebook, or Apple will not be treating people who live in the free world and unfree world differently. And while these companies are pretending that they are trying to protect individual rights and privacy in America or Europe, when it comes to Russia, China, or Turkey, they behave differently. And I think that's unacceptable. Now answering to your question. I can answer probably with all joke in Russia that the difference between Russian and Chinese leadership is that Chinese leadership thinks in centuries and Russian in dollars. Chinese leadership thinks in centuries, Russian in dollars. So it's a very short term, and it's just the answer, simple answer is they don't care. Because at the end of the day, with all my criticism and total disapproval of Chinese political system, there's a plan. China has the global vision. It's probably the most imperialistic vision, so how to spread its influence. And again, they're thinking in centuries, and they want just to build, sort of global empire. Putin's regime is more like a mafia that is just, took over the country and is stealing. So I say that every country has its own mafia, but in Russia, mafia has its own country. So mafia doesn't create. So that's why it's just, all they do is that they steal things and use them for immediate profits. So China, as we know, has massive potential, but still we don't have full information about the development, but it seems that something is happening. So that's why it's not simply about two dictatorships, but it's about the overall attitude. One is just, has sort of ideological concept of global dominance. Another one is just still now. Look, it's something that's related to human nature, because we live in a world where risk-averse mentality dominates almost every business. And if you bring AI, so you have to accept even to a certain degree, the concept of black box. So that certain decisions that could be potentially more effective and could improve your bottom line cannot be explained. And that's a challenge for many top managers who recognize the advantages of bringing AI. But at the same time, they care very much about their ability to control the whole process. Because even if they improve the bottom line, but they cannot explain it to their board or to shareholders, they rather take a pass. So that's what I saw, again, speaking every week, so I can tell you that's happening in the free world all over the place. It's the same, and it's a defensive mentality. So that's why those who can overcome this fear, they could be potentially big winners. But right now, it's very few companies are willing to do that. So I think eventually it will happen. So we're talking maybe 1, 2, 3 years. But right now we are in sort of this gray zone. So there's this, they know it, they should do it, but they don't know how to do it without losing full control of the operation as they used to have before.